What happens when the host becomes the one in the hot seat? Today, I'm answering your questions, and yes, I'm confessing my own bad boss moment. You're not going to want to miss this one. Hi, I'm Beth Fahey, your host of Bad Boss Confessional, the podcast where real leaders get honest about the mistakes that made them better. Today's episode is a little different. No guest, no confession. Well, almost no confession. Today, it's just you and me, and you're asking the questions. That's right, it's an Ask Me Anything. And I have to say, you did not hold back. We've got everything from EOS deep dives to a career what ifs to a question from a legend in the baking world that genuinely made me smile. So grab your coffee, let's get into it. Welcome to Bad Boss Confessional. Do you love running on EOS? Try Strutty, the EOS platform people love. Native integrations and extra features help you manage people, projects, process, and engagement. Connected to your favorite EOS tools and all in one place. You love EOS. It's time to love the platform you're running it on. Try Strutty free at strutty.com. That's STRETY.com. Strutty, the EOS platform people love. Let's be honest, hiring the right people is hard. That's why I love Titus Talent Strategies. Their whole person hiring approach helps you find and keep A players who align with your values, and they back it with an industry-leading guarantee. Best part? Titus Talent Strategies is included in the entrepreneurial toolkit for companies running on EOS. Check them out at titustalent.com/EOS. All right, so here we go. The first question in my Ask Me Anything episode. If you never found EOS, what do you think you'd be doing today? If I hadn't found EOS, I'd be really sad. That's one thing. I mean, I love EOS. I love the system. I love what it does for people. It is absolutely the best thing ever. And I really am having a hard time imagining my life without it. I think that, I've always been a creative person, and where I was headed in my baking business before I found EOS, or really before I decided that EOS was the path that I wanted to go down. I did like doing a lot of speaking. I spoke a lot in the baking industry, at conferences and things like that. And I got a lot of joy out of creating talks and helping people. So, around the same lines of things, as far as helping people, standing up in front of people and teaching and talking. It's something that I think I was born to do, and I really love doing that. So, probably I would have become a professional speaker of some kind. All right, next question. Tell us about a time when you were the bad boss. Well, you must not have been listening to this podcast. I've given plenty of stories where I've shared, some pretty, well, not so flattering versions of myself. I think, like, if I were to look back and think about some specific stories, there's one that really stands out, one that I think about often, and it just makes me cringe over and over again. I had a wonderful pastry chef who was a really hard worker and absolutely fit the core values of the company. And we had a very busy wedding weekend, and we were doing, I don't know, I think like 35 wedding cakes that weekend. If I'm not mistaken, it was Memorial Day, which is also a very heavy graduation and, Memorial Day. I mean, just huge holiday weekend, weddings on top of everything else. And we had no room in our walk-in. And I walked into our walk-in and I saw that somebody had moved a bunch of stuff around. And at the time we had a cafe, and there was meat in a shelf above a open exposed wedding cake. And it's like a cardinal sin in food sanitation. And so I completely lost it. I came screaming out of the walk-in, zeroed in on the person that I was 99% sure had made that error, because she was somebody who moved quickly and didn't always think. I mean, that was the one thing that I would say, you know, her need for speed sometimes led her to making not great decisions. And so I assumed it was her, and I lashed out in front of everybody and dressed her down in front of the whole bakery. And 3 months later, she quit. And I felt and still feel terrible about that. So, Vicky, if you're listening, I am so sorry that I did that. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on food operators, particularly around food sanitation. I mean, I could use that as an excuse, but it really wasn't an excuse for doing that so publicly. So that's why we always say criticize in private, praise in public. And ever since then, I've tried really hard to keep that straight. Next question. What's your favorite non-EOS leadership book? I can think of one right off the top of my head, and I think I'll be able to find it. So bear with me for 1 second. Oh, there it is. Yes, folks, this is a real bookshelf. Okay. So uh, this is the book. It's called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. I have recommended this book to more people than I can count. I have more clients that I have recommended this book to. It's absolutely one of the best things for helping leaders get the right mindset. So there's this concept of being above the line or below the line, which I don't think they invented, but they popularized. And it's written by Jim Dethmer, Diana Chapman, and Kaylee Warner Klemp, who are also part of the Conscious Leadership Groups, or they are the Conscious Leadership Group, which is based here in Chicago. But this is a very popular book. A lot of people have read it. And I think it really does distill the most important things that leaders need to keep in mind as they're leading. And so that is my favorite. All right, next question. What drew you to EOS implementation after your background in film and the bakery world? Was there a moment it all clicked? So I think for this question, the theme that connects all of those various careers together is collaboration. So, entrepreneurship, owning a business, you're collaborating with others. And especially when you bring EOS into a business, you're collaborating with others on the vision. And so then you're collectively all working together towards something. I am not a great solopreneur, even though my business as an EOS franchisee, I guess I am a solopreneur in that regard, but I don't really feel like I am, because I'm part of a larger community that is very tight. We all have the same core values. We're all working for the same thing, and that is to help entrepreneurs live their ideal lives. So that is something that I'm absolutely obsessed with and so glad I get to be a part of. The other careers that I had, film was collaborative. It was a crew of 50, 60 people working to create something. The bakery business that I had, at one point we had 32 people in that organization, and our business was called Creative Cakes. And so we helped people create cakes, worked with them on design to help them build that. But what we were really doing is trying to create a wow customer experience. That was our purpose, cause, or passion. And actually, it was our passion, was to create a wow experience. And so I think I'm still doing that. And I think I was doing that when I was a filmmaker as well, you know, leaving people in awe or emotionally transformed as a result of whatever you're creating. I think that's sort of been a theme for me. And so, writing books and creating and being responsible for, some of the content at EOS Worldwide, where that's having a big impact on a lot of folks. I think that's I'm living the dream, quite honestly. I'm living my best life, and I get to do something that's really impactful for people. So I I don't know what happened. I sometimes have to pinch myself that I got to be as lucky as I am to be an EOS implementer. All right, next question. What's the ideal Kolbe score for an integrator? And what personality traits do you think matter most for success in that seat? Well, I'd hate to say that there is an ideal score for an integrator, although I have seen some themes. Integrators typically have a higher score in fact finder and follow through, a lower score in quick start, and then it really doesn't matter as much the implementer score. And that can vary based on the industry that they're in. And so that one doesn't matter as much. But typically, I see leadership team members with one, two, or three in the implementer. And that's not implementer like I'm an EOS implementer. It's an implementer in that you take the world in either conceptually, that's like a one, two, or three, or a higher score just means that you take the world in and you handle objects and things like that in the world more tangibly, like with your hands. Like if you're in the construction field, it's pretty likely that you're higher in implementer. But anyway, going back to the integrator score, that's what I typically see. Although I have had integrators that have high quick starts. Those tend to be in companies that are a little bit more fast growing. So I've seen integrators with 6, 7, even 8 sometimes. Uh, it's more important for integrators and visionaries to be the missing puzzle piece for each other, I think, though, than it is to have an ideal integrator score. Really, what an integrator needs to be great at is LMA, leading, managing, and holding people accountable. If you don't have an integrator that's great at LMA, it's going to be really hard to have your vision come to life. So make sure that you're putting the right people in the right seats. Kolbe is important, but it isn't the main thing. So having somebody that can lead, coach, manage, encourage, you know, get people through the hard stuff, that's what you need in an integrator. Okay, so this one says, if the visionary won't back the integrator's authority, can the integrator seat even work? What does that team need to hear? Wow. Okay, yes, I have seen this. Unfortunately, sometimes visionaries won't let go. And if any of you saw the episode with Mark C. Winters, he talked about this. It's not that visionaries are always control freaks. They're not in a lot of cases. They are desperate to let go of stuff because they know that they're not really great at it. But if they've been burned, if they've got somebody that they don't trust on their team, sometimes it is hard for them to let go. At the same time, sometimes visionaries don't even give them a chance. They don't let them fail a little bit before they pull the plug on them. And so if the integrator is not leading the team, if they're not holding the team accountable, if there's a shadow authority with the visionary and people are doing end runs and things like that, that's a dysfunctional situation. The visionary should recognize this. They should be aware that this is happening and that we're not really playing by the rules of EOS. And sometimes what I find is that visionaries kind of like it that way. They like being the person that people come to, they like answering all the questions. And so that's not really the job of the visionary unless it happens that the visionary is in the integrator seat. And even then, it's hard, right? Because you've got to remember what hat you're wearing at what time when you're dealing with whatever situation is in front of you. So making sure that your integrator is the right person in the right seat is the number one thing. And then we have to just let them take the ball and run with it. We have to let them do it. And that's what the same page meeting is for, right? So if you're having robust same page meetings with your integrators, visionaries, then that's where you're going to get all of the shtuckus out between you. And the shtuckus is a made up word that I got from an old friend a long time ago, but it's like it's all the garbage, right? We want to have a meeting with the visionary and the integrator, a same page meeting where they're meeting once a week or every couple of weeks. And they're working out all their stuff, like all the conflict that's kind of coming up between them and getting really clear on their roles and how they're going to approach different issues. And they understand in the same page meeting that they need to leave that meeting literally on the same page. And so if you're not having a same page meeting, please start having that. It's a very simple agenda. It's, a meeting once a week, every couple of weeks, where you're meeting for a couple of hours to work through some of the major stuff. The visionary and the integrator have a robust check-in. Each one does 5 minutes of a check-in. There's issues that both of them are bringing to the visionary integrator same page meeting. They put all their issues on the issues list, and then they prioritize what are the most important things that we need to talk about so that we're on the same page. It's not that they're having a meeting before the meeting and figuring out everything together so that they can just disseminate what to do to everyone. It's so that they can get aligned on how they're going to approach an issue before they bring it to the leadership team. And so I think the same page meeting is the biggest solve for whenever that's an issue, as whoever asked the question. Um, so what does the team need to hear? The team needs to hear that you're a united front, that you two have talked about these things prior to the meeting, and that there is a plan or there is an open-ended question that they are willing to hear out. And then collectively, we're going to decide together what the right thing to do is. That's what I believe the team needs to hear. They also need to hear from the visionary that, hey, Bob is the integrator. Um, you know, I can give you my opinion, but I think it's better that you go to Bob because Bob ultimately is the decision maker here. And so they do need to direct traffic, as I've talked about before on the podcast. So that's super important. All right, next question. What's the most common mistake you see leadership teams make in their first year on EOS? So, the most common mistake that I see is not dealing with their right people, right seat issues on the leadership team. Anytime a team delays addressing a GWC issue or a core values issue with somebody on their leadership team, they are delaying the inevitable. I guarantee you that there are going to be many issues on your issues list related to that person who is not the right person in the right seat. And what needs to happen is that the integrator needs to step up and say, this is not really working out. Perhaps this is something that would be discussed in a same page meeting with the visionary, getting a plan, right? When they've identified that we have a right person, right seat issue on the leadership team, and then figuring out when is the best time to execute that plan because it isn't always right away, right? Sometimes it's not the quarter to make a big personnel change. But I would argue delaying this with an excuse every quarter is also not getting you anywhere. So it's okay to time it, go out, find another person, backfill the seat, have tough conversations, put that person into a 3 strikes program, getting everybody on the leadership team to be open and honest about what they're seeing about the right person, right seat issues on their own team is critical to future success. And unfortunately, I don't see this often enough. And we end up doing cleanup on this sometimes 2, 3, 4 years after everybody knew that it was an issue from the get-go. So that's the most common issue. Fix your right person, right seat issues, particularly on the leadership team, and then it will trickle down into the rest of the organization. But if you keep people on the team that don't belong there, not only do you lose your credibility as leaders, but you also are causing the company to hit a ceiling. You are selectively choosing to hit a ceiling in your organization. And we don't want to do that. We got to think about the greater good. So think about the greater good and take care of your RPRS issues. How do you run EOS well when you're also pushing through major change without burning the team out or letting standards slip? Well, okay, so this is, I think, pertaining to rollout. So, rollout, EOS rollout, is something that happens at the beginning of the EOS journey, but it continues. It goes on as long as you're running your business, right? Because we're constantly bringing new people into the organization. We're tuning up things here and there. We are re-rolling out EOS in many instances as we go through the process. And so when people are resisting change, that's totally normal. So EOS as a system, people will resist that. It's a process. They're going to resist it. They have to adapt, get used to running on EOS, start having level 10 meetings, start using scorecards, rocks, all of the tools that are in the EOS toolbox. It's going to take time. And we just really want to see progress, not perfection. Hopefully, whatever the major changes that you're talking about here, in addition to rolling out EOS, that has to be talked about as your rocks, right? As when you're setting rocks, when you're setting goals for the year, this needs to be one of the 3 to 7 goals for the year, or it needs to be one of the 3 to 7 rocks that you have. Because if you're setting rocks properly, you shouldn't be burning out your team. At the beginning of the EOS journey, it's not uncommon for people to take on too much, for them to take too many rocks on, for them to want to get all of these things done, all of the things that are wrong with their business. They start to see it and they want to fix it all right away. And the fact is that you can't. You can't fix it all right away. You need to fix the most important things right away, though. And so prioritizing that with the team and getting everybody on board. Are you going to overshoot sometimes? Sure, but you're going to learn a lot. So the power is in the reflection. At the end of the quarter, reflecting back, how did we do with our rocks this quarter? How did our teams do with their rocks this quarter? Are we giving them the opportunity to reflect on rocks? And so that's where people are going to learn, and they're going to learn how to set better rocks for the next quarter. And that doesn't mean that they're going to set rocks that are easy or make it so that everyone's sandbagging on their rocks. It just means that they're getting the most important things done in a reasonable amount of time without burning themselves out. And so by identifying when they are getting burned out in that reflection, that's how people are going to learn how to do this better. For those of you that don't know, I used to be very involved in the baking industry at a national level. I was the president of the Retail Bakers of America, which was the national trade association for independently owned bakeries. And so we primarily worked with mom and pop family businesses. And many of these folks had amazing bakeries. And if you're fortunate enough to have one of these full line bakeries in your town that's very popular, I can think of Porto's as one if you're living in Los Angeles. Um, and like a handful of others like that are out there. Uh, being a full line bakery is really hard these days because the biggest competition is your retail grocery store. So here's a question from Carl Reisterer, who is the past RBA president and a longtime friend of mine. He asks, the baking industry is in crisis. Young people aren't choosing the trade, and bakeries are struggling to find people willing to work nights and learn the craft. As someone who co-owned a bakery for decades, what do I say to that? Well, the world changes. And one of the things that I noticed when I was the president of the Retail Bakers of America and earlier when I was just a board member is that there are companies, bakeries that adapt and grow and keep up with the times. And then there were the ones that didn't. Now, Carl, I know that your bakery is one that did adapt, and they tried to keep up with everything that was going on. I know that, you're part of the teams that adopted point of sale systems, you had a website. These were things that at the beginning of my bakery ownership, I saw several bakeries go out of business because they didn't take credit cards. They took all of their orders on paper. They didn't have any real data for running their businesses. And they just thought that the way to get better at running their bakeries was to work harder. We were fortunate enough to find EOS. EOS really helped us get through the muck and get out and above and look at the business in a different way. But there are many people out there in businesses like bakeries that are struggling because they're kind of stuck in the past and thinking that the way that we used to do things is how we're going to stay in front of things moving forward. But that's not really true. And so you've got to adapt, you've got to change. And one of the things that has changed is our workforce. We have people that don't want to work as hard as we did. And, Carl, I know that you're older than I am. I'm a Gen X. I'm an old Gen X person. So I'm assuming you're a baby boomer. And a lot of us don't understand today's current workforce. I hear my colleagues and my peers, my Gen X and baby boomer peers talking about how people don't have a work ethic. The thing is I think they do have a work ethic. And I think that the younger generation is actually really smart because they're not grinding away and looking at their life at the end and saying, what happened, right? And so we have to adapt to that new sort of worker. And that may mean that people don't work nights, that we don't get a night baker. We have to adapt and have things done differently. But that's hard when you're talking about compromising a product like a baked good. And what a lot of people in my industry shifted to, in the 90s and the early 2000s was, it was the stuff that you would get frozen in and then bake off in your own bakery, or it would come out of a bucket. And you're losing the craft. And that is really sad. I think the good news here is that, you know, not to not that I have a crystal ball of the future or anything, but I do think that we may be going back in many ways to an agrarian society for some folks. Some people are just going to want to go and grow blueberries. They're not going to want to be part of the AI revolution. And that's okay because we need blueberries. We also need great baked goods. So, looking at what you can do, I think, to adapt to the current workforce. I know that at our bakery, we just didn't have a night baker, and we did all our baking in the day. And we had different products, so that might mean that you change your product line, but you know, it's a conundrum, right? So adapting as we go, that's all part of the process. What I love about EOS is that when things start to change, like AI is starting to have a big impact on many businesses, when economic headwinds are not really blowing in the right way, when the workforce changes, you get to talk about that every quarter and identify those issues. So I get to keep my ear to the ground and hear about what's going on, but all I can say is just adapting. And I'm so glad you're out there, Carl, making the great breads and cakes and pastries that you always have. And I hope people come and find your bakery, and we'll make sure to put it in the show notes. And then for anybody listening that does love baked goods, I strongly encourage you to support small business, small to mid-size bakeries in your town, in your area. And, it's those independently owned bakeries, the people that own the small to mid-sized businesses, that's the backbone of the economy. And, it's great having people out there like Cisco and, other big conglomerates that can provide lower cost ingredients to people, but we lose something with that. So maybe spend a little bit more to get something that's truly amazing. All right, last question. What do you know now that you wish you had known in your first year as an EOS implementer? In my first year as an EOS implementer, you know, I got very involved with my clients' success. I was really attached to outcomes, like how well they did. I felt like, I guess, that it, said how well I was doing for them. And so sometimes I would get really frustrated if they weren't going fast enough. And I even, implementers, we have our implementer guides. And early in the journey, we're referring to these pretty often because we just want to make sure that we're not forgetting anything. There's a lot to remember, and it's totally normal if your implementer is using an implementer guide. And in my implementer binder, where I had all my guides, I had a laminated card that said 3 times over, it said, "This is not your business. This is not your business. This is not your business," because I had to remind myself that it wasn't my business and that people are wired differently than me. Hard to believe. Not everybody is a quick start. Not everybody wants to go, 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 go. And some teams move slower. And that's okay. It's okay that they move slower. So I think that's my biggest lesson. And quite honestly, I still have to learn this lesson periodically. I think Brene Brown talks about what's the one leadership lesson that you need to learn over and over again. And mine would be, not everyone is on my timeline. So that's a wrap on our Ask Me Anything episode. Thank you for sending in such great questions. Honestly, this one was a blast. If you love this episode, please like, subscribe, and share with friends who need to hear this. Thanks for listening to Bad Boss Confessional. We'll see you again next week.